Hello, everyone, and welcome to our cybersecurity webinar today. This is always top of mind for us, and it's been an important topic for a long time, but it continues to evolve and gain prevalence. So we are super glad that you have joined us to continue to learn and improve your cybersecurity strategies. I am going to go through a couple of slides here. The first one is simply Zoom settings to make sure that everyone is able to see everything as we intend. On the upper right-hand corner of your screen, there should be a little view drop down. And depending on what version of Zoom you have, you're going to want to select either the standard or the speaker view. And then at the bottom of that drop-down menu, you will also see how to make it full screen. Zoom has changed a little bit of their functionality regarding asking questions. So we want to make sure that everyone is able to ask questions since this is intended to be a conversational event. At the bottom taskbar, if you can't see it, just go ahead and pull your mouse to the bottom of the screen and it should pop up. From there, you will be able to select the chat button. And once you select that chat button, there will be a blue icon in the upper left-hand side of that chat box. If you click on that blue chat box and select New Chat, you should be able to select Aspen Capital Management Host, and then type your question into that pop-up box at the bottom and press Enter to submit the question to us. So like I said, this is intended to be conversational. We're hoping that you've brought some questions with you, or you will submit questions as we sort of progress through our discussion today. So please submit your chats, and hopefully we can have a great discussion. I'm going to do a quick run through of who is participating in this today. So first of all, I'm Rachel Lisney. I lead the operations team at Aspen Capital, as well as our firm's compliance efforts. And I'm joined by Miranda Barnhart. She is an operations associate with our team. She handles a lot of different items for our clients. And she also handles a lot internally, which includes staying on top of some of our cybersecurity education and initiatives. We're joined today by Nick Mancini. He is a senior consultant for Charles Schwab. And we've worked with Nick on a couple of different items and have really appreciated his collaboration and expertise. He will be answering the lion's share of the questions today because he has been in this field for a long time and has developed a lot of knowledge and insights in this area. So I am just going to once more ask for you to submit any questions you might have. And I'm going to go ahead and stop my share so that we can start the discussion. Nick, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone today.
Great. So, Nick, just to kick us off, I would love for you to tell us what you are seeing in the cybersecurity landscape these days.
Perfect. I'd love to. So, we've all heard of the Nigerian prince scammer, and if you haven't heard of it, it's a scheme that scammers used to use maybe 10, 20 years ago to send an email with very broken English, and the scheme that they typically use was they needed to move some money, an inheritance, and in order to facilitate that money movement, they needed the victim to pay some fees, and that's how the scam operated. Those days are long gone. So I want to paint a picture of what it looks like out there today for everyone, because these bad actors, these fraudsters, have really, really significantly upped their game. So today, it really is a group of criminal organizations that in many ways would look like a legitimate organization. So these folks have senior management, middle management. They've got research and development departments. They have HR departments. They do performance reviews. In many ways, they would look like a regular, legitimate business until you understand what they're organized around, which is fraud. So one stat that really shocked me was that if we took the cyber criminals that are out there today and the volume of fraud, the funds that they've stolen, the economic impact of disrupted operations, if we put that all into a single country, it would add up to over $11 trillion annually. It's trillion with a T. That would make it the second highest GDP in the world, behind the United States and China, and just above Germany. So the scale of fraud that is out there is enormous, and unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be slowing down. Um, and so one of the best things that we can do today is spread that awareness, and especially for those of you who may be retired and out of the workforce. You may not be aware of the scale that's out there, and the fact that today it's really not a matter of if you're going to be targeted for a scam or a fraud attempt. It's a matter of when. So some of the things that we'll talk about today, I want to make sure that they're very actionable so that you can take steps to prevent yourself, or if you are a victim of something, you can quickly mitigate the risk or the impact of that incident.
Well, Nick, it sounds like we're up against, we're kind of fighting up against a lot of advanced technology. I know that there's a lot of concerns that people have had with that. One of the questions that we had is just like, we hear that email is one of the biggest cyber threats right now. And I was wondering if you can explain what we can do to better protect ourselves against threats and emails.
Yes, absolutely. So I do have some visibility into the fraud that Schwab sees across all of our organizations, the advisor services division that works with you all at Aspen, and then our retail division that works directly with investors. And one of the commonalities across those events, I'd say, just a kind of a guesstimate, rough number would be 75–80% of the time is email. So as my colleague likes to say, you should think of email as public enemy number one when it comes to cyber criminals and cyber fraud. For those of us, myself included, who grew up in a time before email existed, it was somewhat exciting to get a letter in the mail from the U.S. Postal Service. So you went to the mailbox, and it was going to be a surprise on, who mailed you. Maybe there's, some magazines and some interesting things, some bills that weren't so exciting, but then you got a letter from a relative that you haven't spoken to in a long time and couldn't wait to open that up and see what it was about. So I think a lot of us have taken that same kind of mindset and moved it over to email. And the cyber criminals have gotten smarter, as we said, and they know that. And they know that from their perspective, it's a very low cost to send out thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of emails. And they're in a lot of ways playing a game of numbers. They know that if it's just a fraction of a percentage of folks that take action based on that email, that could add up. If it's a million emails, that could be 10,000 folks that get to that next step. And so one of the key takeaways from today is around email and email hygiene. So one of the best things that we can do is to slow down. We live in a busy world, and things are moving seemingly rapidly as time progresses. And again, the fraudsters know this, and they try to exploit it or take advantage of it. So when you get that email from Amazon that says a package was delivered and you weren't expecting a package, that should be a red flag for you. Frankly, any type of inbound email should be treated as suspicious until you can prove it otherwise. As I said, one of the best things that you can do is to take your mouse and hover over the link. So if it says click here to see more information or click here to take action, before clicking, just hover over the link, and down at the bottom of the screen, it will preview the URL that you would be taken to should you click on that link. What you want to do is take a look at that URL and just make sure that the domain or the name in the URL, the .com, if you will, that component of the URL, that corresponds with the sender. If it doesn't, that should raise a red flag. It's not necessarily an indication of fraud, because a lot of companies will use a third-party service to send out marketing emails. But it should raise your red flags. The other thing that folks should do is look at the email header. Look at the sender. Again, you can mouse over that to see additional details, or sometimes there's a more button that you can click on, and that's going to give you some additional clues about the legitimacy of that particular email. If the email is, let's say, from Schwab, but the sender says gmail.com, that should be a really deep red colored flag for you that if you slow down and think about it, Schwab, as a large profitable organization, is likely not going to be routing their emails through a free personal service like Gmail. And so those are a couple things that you should look at. But the big thing to keep in mind is that we're all being targeted. As time has gone on and there's been a number of data breaches, certainly our email addresses are all probably out there on the dark web. And so that's a bit of information that these bad actors know about us. They know that this is a live email address that has a recipient that views it. And we're starting to see these folks, these bad actors, correlate that information with other bits of data that they're able to glean through other sources. And we'll get into that as we discuss further. The other piece about email that folks should be aware of is the history that's in there. So just speaking personally, when I first got email, again, I kind of had that mindset. It was a more convenient way to use the traditional snail mail or U.S. Postal Service mail, but it had some storage capability. So, way back in the day, I was communicating with my CPA about taxes, and we would go back and forth on email in preparation of my taxes. And as a result, I would send them, sensitive information, not thinking much of it at the time. That was still in my sent items box in my personal Gmail until I moved into this role and became much more familiar with the cybersecurity risks that are out there. And so another action step I think all folks should take is just to go through a process of a hygiene process, frankly. Look through your sent items in your email. Look in those folders that you may have archived years ago. If there's anything sensitive in there, move that out, delete it, store it someplace else, because the bad actors, what we're seeing lately is that they will often lay dormant for a while. So they'll gain access to somebody's email account, and then they won't do anything. They'll just observe. They'll try to pick up a sense on how this person communicates with others. Are they more formal in their email communications? Are they more casual? Who are they communicating with? They'll start to build a profile of the person who controls the account that they've compromised. And then once they've collected enough information about how that person communicates and who they communicate with, they will then strike. And it could be sending out a request for a wire or some other activity that's going to gain them funds. Ultimately, what they're after is the profit motivation. They're after after our funds, essentially. So those are the major things that I want to make sure everyone knows about email. Is it's not like the U.S. Postal Service. Treat it very suspiciously. Slow down. Hover over links, and just be mindful before you take action. Maybe to extend that a little bit, a lot of those same principles also apply to texting or SMS. That's another channel that we're seeing a lot of bad actors and fraudsters leverage, much in the same way that they do with email. Again, they know that as a society, there's more of an expectation of urgency when it comes to texting or SMS messages. And so we've seen kind of incidents or kind of a batch of incidents where folks in a certain geography will get a text message about we got these here in Phoenix, about a toll being overdue. And little do they know that the Phoenix area, we don't have freeways that have toll roads. And so they didn't get a lot of victims in our area, but that also shows that these folks are just playing a game of numbers and casting as wide a net as possible. So keep in mind too, if you click on an email or click on a link in an SMS that in retrospect you maybe shouldn't have, it's not the end of the world. You don't need to throw your computer out and start over from scratch. That's the first step in a fraud process, but certainly if you have those suspicions or something's nagging at you, don't take further action. And really one of the best things that we can do is to ask somebody else, get a second set of eyes in the situation. If you're uncertain about what you clicked on or legitimacy of an email, what you can do is ask a trusted friend, hey, this seems a little suspicious. Can you take a look at it? Let's talk it through. Maybe if it's an email from Aspen Capital that you're unsure of, rather than clicking on the link, pick up the phone and give them a call on the number that you've got saved in your phone. Or if it's an email from Schwab and you're unsure whether it's legitimate, don't click on the link, but just go into your browser separately and then access your bookmark for schwab.com, so that you're not clicking that link. And it may be legitimate, it may not be. But going to the provider in a manner that you know and you've set up beforehand, or you know that's within your control, is a better route to take if you're on the fence or unsure about whether an email or an SMS text message is legitimate or not.
Yeah, that is great. And thank you for actually kind of going on the tangent there, because that does answer one of the questions that came in about text links. So
Okay.
you got ahead of us here.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah, so another question on this front that was submitted by one of our clients in advance, Nick, was we communicate with Aspen via email many times, and should we set up a more secured communication path? Can you explain why it is so important that sensitive matters and information not be communicated via email, but rather the portal system?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. And thank you for submitting that question. Again, I'll make a plug here for those of you maybe didn't hear at the beginning of the call. We want to make this as interactive as possible. So you've got a Q&A or a chat feature at the bottom of your screen. It may be in the settings if you don't see it immediately, but certainly if you've got questions as we go through this, please submit that through the chat feature. We'll do our best to answer it. But to your question about sending sensitive information, yeah, this is an area of education. It's an educational opportunity that we see with a lot of clients of advisor firms because simply they're not aware of the risk that they're taking, excuse me, when it comes to sending email. But I'll put it this way. Essentially, your email, as it traverses the internet from your machine or your computer to Aspen Capital or really anywhere, think of it as a postcard. Anyone potentially along that path is able to read the contents of that email. And, you know, it's a bit of a needle in a haystack. So there's some security through obscurity to a certain degree. But when it comes to any communications that have sensitive information, name, address, account number, financial numbers, credit information, things like that, that should not be sent over email. That should, with Aspen specifically, Aspen has invested in an online portal. And so what you could do, I would suggest you do in that situation, is still send the email, hey, Rachel, I'm sending you something through the secure portal. Please go to the secure portal to take a look at it. In that scenario, you're sending the communication to the person, to the recipient, that you're submitting that sensitive information through a secure channel. So that really is a best practice. And again, the reason for that is what I described earlier with having a lot of sensitive information in your sent items or your history in your email. What the bad actors do, like I said, is they will mine that for information about you to build a profile and come up with a better social engineering tactic to separate you from some of your money.
Yeah, thank you for that. And to reiterate, actually, two things. First of all, because I know we had a couple people join late, like Nick said, for submitting the chat, if you are getting a little confused on how to submit it, it is that blue icon in the top left of the chat bar. I know that Zoom has changed this recently, so I just wanted to make you aware again. And then also to reiterate the client portal. If we are sending you sensitive information, we are always going to use that client portal and upload a document there. If you need to give us some piece of sensitive information that's like one account number or something like that, you can also always pick up the phone and call us. We use that portal back and forth for written information, but we're perfectly happy to talk on the phone as well. So with that, it looks like we had a question come in on passwords. Let's change gears a little bit from email to passwords. Miranda, take it away.
So Nick, I was wondering if we could start off on the topic of passwords with you just sharing a little bit of giving us some context and sharing some best practices and how we should be thinking about our passwords.
Yeah, there's three takeaways I want to make sure everyone remembers when we talk about passwords. But let me set the context. So, as computers were evolving, there were some limitations on memory, and so as a result, there was literally a limitation in some back-end technology systems that limited the number of characters that could be stored in a field. And I think it was like 8. And so the challenge was how do you create or come up with a password that's going to fit into that restriction of character limitation, but still be unique and secure. And so the National Institute of Standards and Technology. This is a governmental agency that puts out standards for technology and other things. Their recommendation was that you make that password complex, and that you change it every 3 to 6 months, depending on the sensitivity of the system that you're looking to protect. That's the challenge that we had at the time, back in the 90s and early 2000s. That's no longer a limitation. So there's a greater capacity for storing passwords, and so as a result, NIST has changed their guidance around passwords. The three things that everyone should keep in mind is you want to have your passwords unique across websites. You don't want to reuse passwords. Length is far more important than complexity. So you want to have at least 15 character passwords. And then the third one is multi-factor authentication, which we can talk about in some more detail. But let me address the first two. With regard to unique passwords, why is that important? Well, as we've all seen in the news, it seems like there isn't a week that goes by without hearing about some data breach, whether it's AT&T or Target or a healthcare company. Companies are being penetrated by bad actors, and information is getting stolen left and right. And typically, it's low value information. Sometimes it's much more valuable. But in the example of AT&T, I think all of their users' IDs and passwords were compromised by bad actors. And so what the bad actors realized was, because of the requirements, early on about having a complex password, well, that's hard to remember for folks. So folks would come up with a complex password, and then they use that for their AT&T account, for their Schwab account, for their banking account. They would reuse that password across different systems. So when one of those sets of credentials got compromised, the bad actors would typically sell them in bulk on the black market. And then another bad actor would buy that information and then try to stuff those credentials into different websites. Bank of America, Schwab, even Aspen Capital's site, because they know that folks reuse them. And again, it's a game of numbers. If it's just 1/10 of 1% of folks who reuse passwords, and we know it's a lot bigger than that, then they're going to gain access to other websites that weren't part of that initial compromise. But because we're reusing passwords, it's easy for them to get into other websites. So that's why it's important that everyone have a password that's unique across websites. Now, there may be an exception to that. If it's just a news website where there's nothing sensitive stored there, then that's probably okay to reuse passwords. I still wouldn't recommend that you do it. But certainly, one of the action steps for anyone in here that is reusing passwords is to make sure that you've got a new password that's unique across those financial websites and those websites that have very sensitive information. The second actionable item here is around length. And the reason why this is important is because the Moore's law, if you've heard of that, but essentially the power of computing, it is doubling every 18 to 24 months. And so these bad actors have come up with programs that they call brute force tools. So essentially, they guess every combination of every number, letter, and character. And the faster it's able to make those guesses, the faster they're able to compromise a password. So as you add a character to a password, it exponentially increases the amount of time that a computer needs in order to crack or guess that password. So for that reason, length provides far more security than complexity. One of the strategies that might be helpful here is to think of a pass sentence or a pass phrase. The quick fox jumped over the lazy river. I may have butchered that a little bit, but something like that that's easy to remember, memorable. But the key there is that it's got a longer number of characters in the password. Not every website will support that, but more and more sites are supporting the ability to add spaces into your passwords and things like that. Now, to make that, so if I'm somebody who's non-technical and I'm hearing this advice, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I've got to change all my passwords, and they've got to be unique. How am I going to keep track of all this? Well, it brings up the next best practice or recommendation, which is a password manager. So this was a godsend for me when I discovered it, a long time ago. It's become more and more popular, more available today. But I would recommend that folks look at purchasing a password manager. What these tools do is it's a secure vault that allows you to not only store and manage the passwords across all the different websites that you may use, but it will generate those passwords for you. And you can set in the settings, a default never generate a password more than 15 characters or less than 15 characters, or use a passphrase instead of a random set of characters. Come up with a set of 6 words or 3 words that'll meet that minimum character requirement. These tools integrate with your phone, with your web browser, with all the devices you may use, so that if you change a password on one system, it gets synced over to the other systems that you use. The really important part, though, is that it has a master password. And so that's one that, again, you want to make that unique. You want to make that very long. And you want to keep that secure, because that is the keys to the kingdom. Frankly, if you forget that password, these password manager tools are so secure that even the company that makes it won't be able to help you get back into your password vault if you've forgotten your master password. That's how important they are. So when we talk about password managers, I don't like to recommend one over the other because things change over time. But what I would suggest that folks do is look for a password manager that you pay for. So it's a valuable service that you want to ensure that the company behind it has enough resources to keep going and invest in their technologies. And they're not terribly expensive. I think I pay $40 a year for a family subscription I use Bitwarden personally. But there's other ones out there, OnePass. At Schwab, we use a tool called KeyPass. LastPass is another popular one. There's a number of these tools out there. But you do want to look for one that you pay for, and then also look for one that's got thousands of reviews. So something that's used pretty widely. It's pretty ubiquitous. There's a great community of folks who will continue to support that tool over the long run. The exception to that rule of looking for one that you pay for is Apple's password manager. So that's one that's included from Apple, and it is very secure. It's one that if you've got an iPhone or you're on the Apple ecosystem, that I'm comfortable telling folks to use that because it achieves the same outcome, and it's from a trusted provider. On the flip side, one password manager that I would suggest folks avoid is the password manager that's integrated into the web browser. So Google Chrome will often ask you, do you want to save your password or remember your password for this site? It can be a little tricky to differentiate between whether that's Google Chrome or maybe a password manager extension or plugin that you've added to Google Chrome. So just take a moment to make sure that you understand what system is asking you to save your password. There's actually settings that you can go to in the browser to disable that prompt to save your password or save your information. And I would suggest ticking that setting so that it does not prompt you to save your passwords. And whether that's Google Chrome or Firefox or Microsoft Edge, those in-browser password managers are notoriously weak in terms of security. So yes, they're very convenient, but if a bad actor gains access to your system, it's easy for them to get visibility into those passwords themselves.
Thank you. That was very helpful. I like how you framed that part where, sometimes it's like, oh, I don't really want to pay for something, but a password manager is something where you do want to be paying for it because it's
Absolutely.
very important. We
There's a
actually did
tremendous
have a
value.
client. Sorry, what was that?
I said there's a tremendous value that they provide.
Yeah, I agree. We actually did have a client question submitted in advance that relates to passwords. And that was, when will Schwab offer FIDOalliance.org FIDO2 passkey and USB security key support for passwordless authentication for Schwab user accounts? I was wondering if you could help provide a little bit more context around this question.
I love that question, first of all. So thank you to whomever asked it. Clearly, you know your stuff. That's some advanced technology there. So I want to make sure I address the question, but also in a way that is applicable to the wider audience. So what we're talking about here is starting to get into the multi-factor authentication, or MFA or 2FA, part of identity management, or pass user IDs and passwords. And so if we think about a user ID and a password, really this is something that one knows. This is something that I know my passwords, or through the password manager, I know my passwords. And that's easily compromised, as we've seen with these data breaches. The provider also knows your ID and password, and there's a possibility that could be compromised through a breach in the provider. The second factor of authentication, or identity, management, is it could take various forms. So one of those forms is what's called a hardware key, and there's a consortium out there called the FIDO2 Alliance that puts out standards around these hardware-based multi-factor authentication devices. The way to differentiate that from an ID and a password is, well, again, those ID and password is something that you know. The second factor authentication is something that you have. And oftentimes, that's the only thing that's protecting an account from being compromised. So if, for those of us out there that have reused passwords, and maybe one of the set of credentials was compromised in a breach, and it's the same one you use on, say, schwab.com, if you've set up multi-factor authentication, the bad actor is still not going to be able to access the account, because while they know the ID and the password, they don't have that second layer of authentication. They don't have that, in this case, hardware key that the person who asked the question is referencing. So in terms of multi-factor authentication, the hardware key is the most secure, because it's a physical device that you've got to plug into your phone or your computer in order to unlock the account. But there are other forms of authentication. And what we have today at Schwab is what's called a soft key multi-factor authentication. So this is something that everyone is able to set up today. If you go into Schwab Alliance and log in to our security center, you can enable, we use Semantic, and what this does is generates a code. So there's an app that you need to download and install on your device. And then a code gets generated every few seconds. And that is it corresponds to the service on our end, so that you log in with your user ID, your password, and then you look at the code, you type it in, and then you're able to access schwab.com. So we are looking at enabling hardware keys, but we're not there yet. And I don't have a timeline for the person who asked, I don't have a timeline on when that's going to be available. Rest assured, though, that's not the only layer of security that we have in place in terms of logging into our website. There's a number of other anomaly detection, fraud detection measures that we take to ensure that logons are coming from people that we expect it to come from. So the other multi-factor authentication that's very, very common is SMS or text messaging. And I would, in terms of multi-factor authentication, something is better than nothing. So don't misconstrue what I'm about to say here. If you have text messaging, set up, absolutely set that up and use that if that's all that's available from the provider. The other two that I described are a little bit better, a little bit more secure, but they're still, the text messaging is better than nothing. And what that does, and I'm sure we've all seen it, you log into a website, it says, takes you to a page, it says, please enter the code that we just texted you. And then you can check the box to remember that the device that you're on. You enter the code, and then you're in. The reason why I put that a little bit lower than the others is there's something we're seeing out there called, I forget the name of it, but it's essentially some bad actor porting one's telephone number. So they basically steal your phone number. And typically that's done after they have your ID and your password. They'll port one's telephone number over to one of their phones. And now they have the ID and the password that is known. They also have a device that will give them the password to let them into the website. So that's the third level of multi-factor authentication. And again, the message here, the takeaway should be that if multi-factor authentication is available, you absolutely should enable it, especially on sensitive websites. There was an incident that we saw, unfortunately, with another advisory firm who had been compromised. And one of the sites that got compromised, in addition to Schwab, their access to Schwab, they had chosen, for whatever reason, not to turn on multi-factor authentication, and that this particular firm was found additionally liable because they had measures available to them that they did not take. So it really does help, reduce the chances of somebody compromising an account. It's critically important. There's another emerging technology I'll touch on here. It's called pass keys, and it's starting to roll out now. What this is a way for a website or a provider to uniquely identify the device that you're logging in from. So it takes there's a unique fingerprint for whether it's a phone or a tablet or a computer that uniquely identifies that particular device, and it stores that information on your computer so that the next time that you log in, you are identified or authenticated from that same device. If the pass key technology is available from a provider, that's a great resource to use as well. But like I said, it's relatively new, and we're seeing more and more adoption out there, but it's not out there everywhere.
Yeah, thank you for walking us through all of that, Nick. Switching directions a little bit, can you speak to the fraud that custodians such as Schwab see related to money movement and fund disbursement requests? This is a
Yeah,
big topic for us, very important. And so I would
it
love
is.
you to talk about that for a little while.
Yes. So this is what all the bad actors are after is the money, right? And unfortunately, they've identified firms like Aspen Capital Management who aren't as well known or large in terms of headcount as Chase or Schwab or Bank of America, as potential avenues for them to conduct their fraud. And so we're seeing an increased amount of bad actors target registered investment advisors like Aspen Capital and try to exploit the defenses that are out there. As a result of this increased level of fraud, we've been putting out recommendations and best practices to our clients, Aspen included. One of the best things that your advisor can do, the folks at Aspen can do, and all of our advisor clients, is to verbally verify any kind of money movement, just to make sure that the person who is requesting that money movement is in fact the client and not some bad actor masquerading as a client. Um, and we just had an in-depth discussion, multi-meeting discussion around cybersecurity with Aspen Capital, and I know that they don't do this, but if you try to request a money movement over email, you're going to get a phone call because a bad actor could potentially compromise your email and send that in fraudulently. And unless folks at Aspen Capital are really have confidence that it's you, the owner of the funds, who's making the request, they're not going to do it. So be aware that that's I wouldn't say a requirement at this stage, but it likely will be soon. But it's really a best practice ultimately to protect your funds, to make sure that a bad actor has not impersonated you, because we've seen that time and time again. And it's very unfortunate when it happens. But like I said, we're taking additional measures to thwart the types of fraud that we're seeing. There may be situations where they want to jump on a video call with you. We're seeing firms do FaceTime with their clients because the phone call may not give them the level of confidence that's needed to transact that money movement, especially if the circumstances are a little suspicious. So the ask here is that you understand that these additional measures around money movement specifically, but also to a certain degree, security movements and trades really are designed to help ensure that we're protecting your assets.
Yes, I'll just echo that too, Nick. I feel like I want to echo virtually everything that you're saying. But in general, you can absolutely expect to hear from us at Aspen Capital if we feel at all that the request that we've received from you is suspicious. So like Nick said, if you send an email requesting money to a bank link that doesn't already exist on your profile that we've confirmed, or to a third party, like if you're buying a house or anything like that, we are going to reach out and confirm that request via channels other than email to make sure that it is not fraudulent, because like Nick said, the fraud in this whole realm is so prevalent that we absolutely want to make sure that we are protecting your assets and your information. Nick,
Yeah.
something that we have really loved the last couple of years with the move to Charles Schwab has been e-authorization. So I was hoping that
Yes.
you could talk about e-authorization a little bit because, as we know, that adds an additional layer of security and I would venture to say convenience for the client.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. I was going to bring it up if you hadn't. So this is a relatively newer process or technology that we've come out with, and it's called e-authorization. And the way that it works is, somebody at Aspen Capital may initiate a money movement on your behalf at Schwab, and in order to facilitate that money movement, the final step is an authorization from the owner of the funds, from the end client, as we like to say. And so the form that takes is typically in the mobile app on your phone. You'll see a pop-up. You may have to log in to see it, but you'll see a pop-up that says, there's a request to move funds from this account to wherever it's going. Do you approve or deny it? And that, like you said, Rachel, it's a multi-factor authentication step in a way. It's confirmation that yes, in fact, this is a legitimate request for money movement, and it really helps to protect against fraud. In fact, there was an incident with another firm where the advisor had been compromised, unfortunately, and for whatever reason, the bad actor initiated, they initiated a money movement, but for whatever reason, they chose to enable the e-authorization feature, and so the end client, the owner of the funds, saw that notice on their phone on their Schwab app and didn't recognize it, and so they called the advisor and said, "What is this money movement about?" And the advisor said, "What are you talking about? What money movement?" And so in that situation, the fraud was thwarted because of the e-authorization capability that we have in place. So that absolutely is a best practice, and again, it's designed to help ensure that your funds are protected.
Awesome. Let's move a little bit into kind of safe computing practices. Miranda, I know we had a couple questions come in on this front.
Yes, we did. One of the questions that we had submitted was how much security value is there in using a VPN? This person says, I ask because I frequently have trouble connecting to Schwab with my VPN on, and the solution is always to turn it off. I guess a parallel question is, how do I connect to Schwab when my VPN is on?
Okay, great question. So for those that may not know what a VPN is, let me just define it. So it stands for Virtual Private Network, and it's a bit of technology that requires an app that you install on the device that you're going to be using the VPN with, your phone or your computer or what have you. And it allows you to very securely connect to whichever website that you're intending to connect to. So rather than using let me give you an example in this way. If you're at Starbucks and you're getting a cup of coffee and you've got some time to kill and you decide to, check your balances on Schwab.com, you connect to the Starbucks Wi-Fi, and then you log into Schwab.com. All of that information between your phone and Schwab is transmitting over the Starbucks Wi-Fi network, going to a different server, bouncing over the internet. All of that is unencrypted. So anyone, like a postcard, anyone can see the contents of the packets that are sent. When you use a VPN, you're creating a secure connection point between your device and the VPN provider, so that the traffic that goes over that Wi-Fi connection cannot be seen by anyone. And then from the VPN provider, it goes out to, in this example, Schwab.com. So that's what a VPN does. It's not always necessary to use. So, to the question specifically about, some issues connecting to Schwab.com, one of the things that comes to mind is that you may not need to use it all the time. The way that you should think about when you should think about using it is if you're on any network that you don't control. So if you're at Starbucks, or you're at the hotel, or you're taking a cruise, or you're out and about and connected to a Wi-Fi network that you don't control, then you should absolutely use a VPN if you're browsing to any site like Schwab or anything that's got financial information or is sensitive in nature. But if you're at home and it's a router that you purchased and it's relatively new, and you've got assurances that somebody didn't swap it out for something nefarious, then you can connect over your own Wi-Fi to Schwab.com, or if you go to Aspen's office and connect to their Wi-Fi, that's secure as well. It's really just in situations where you're a little bit unsure of the network that you're connecting on that you want to use a VPN. There may be some specific issues that the person who has questions is experiencing, and so I'd encourage that person to just reach out to either Aspen Capital or to the Schwab Alliance team for some support. It could be that the particular VPN provider that you're using needs some settings tweaked. So maybe that VPN provider is providing what's called the exit node, or kind of the egress point in Canada or Mexico or some other country, and our systems recognize that as suspicious, and so we disable it or block it. That could be happening too. When it comes to VPN providers, just like with the password managers, there's a number of them out there. They're very, even more so than password managers, they're very ubiquitous. Look for one that's very popular in terms of its usage, a brand name, if you will. Also expect to pay for it, because as the saying goes, if you're using a service that you're not paying for, you're the product. Your information is getting sold elsewhere, and so it kind of defeats the purpose of a VPN, around privacy. So make sure that it's a reputable VPN provider that you're paying for, and they're not sharing your information in any way with anyone.
Great. We did have one question come in on this topic while you were talking. And that question is, if I log onto Schwab from my iPhone from the cell network, so Wi-Fi is shut off, is that secure?
Generally speaking, yes. There's no absolutes in life, but generally speaking, the cell connection is far more secure, far more private than a Wi-Fi connection. Just to take that Starbucks example a little bit further, the way that Wi-Fi networks work is you come up with a name for your Wi-Fi network and you set a password for it, or you leave it open, like Starbucks leaves theirs open. Anyone, you really don't know if that free Starbucks Wi-Fi network is actually Starbucks provided, or if it's some hacker sitting in his car in the parking lot with a piece of equipment that has a very strong antenna that's overpowering the antenna of the Starbucks Wi-Fi and collecting all the information from the patrons of Starbucks as he sits in his car and tries to do his nefarious activities. So because those Wi-Fi networks are very easy to stand up and imitate legitimate ones, it makes them insecure. That really isn't possible with a cellular connection, or it's not very feasible with a cellular connection. And that's why connecting to the cell phone and turning off your Wi-Fi is still more secure than using Wi-Fi.
Great. Well, we had a couple other questions come in. Rachel, do you mind pulling them up?
Sure. And while we're pulling those up, one other thing we wanted to touch on, Nick, was the importance of software maintenance and keeping our tech up to date. So I know we only have about 12 minutes left.
Okay.
But if we can talk about that briefly and then get to these few questions that have come in, that should work wonderfully.
Let's do it. That's awesome. So thanks for asking about that. This is an area that's increasingly important, and it's updating your devices. So the takeaway here is that all the devices that you use, you need to check on a regular basis to see if there's updates. So it used to be when a software got updated, they put out a list of the release notes, right? All the new features and functionality that they put into it, all the bug fixes and vulnerabilities that they've patched. What happened was that bad actors were looking at as a playbook for vulnerabilities that they could exploit in the wild. And so the publishers stopped, they continue to include the features and the capabilities that are new, but they stopped including the vulnerabilities that they patched or the bugs that they fixed. But rest assured, those updates have patches for vulnerabilities, they have fixes for bugs, they're just not publishing them. And so with the advent of AI and some of the capabilities that are now available to just anyone with AI, vulnerabilities are getting identified more and more and with more frequency. And so it's ever more important for folks to make sure that your devices are updated with the latest updates. And if there's a device that you have that is too old for an update, that's happened to me recently, really it's time for a new device. That if the device can't receive security updates, get a new device in today's world. In fact, think just this week I saw the headline. I didn't have a chance to read the entire article, but the government, the United States government has put a ban on the import of internet routers made overseas in some capacity. Again, I don't know the full details of that, but the reason for that ban was out of an abundance of caution around security. Compromised home internet routers is a pretty popular attack vector. It's one of those things that we buy when we move into our place, or maybe we upgrade, and then we forget about it. But those devices too should be included in that periodic check for updates. Are there any updates for the router that I use for my internet connection or my smart TV? If you've got any webcams or a smart fridge, these IoT devices, the S in IoT stands for security. There is no S in IoT. These devices, these IoT devices, are notoriously bad at security. So whatever updates they make available, you want to make sure that you apply them right away.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm going to read off this. We had one question submitted that said, when I call Schwab, the phone system says your voice is your password. Is that safe since voices can be copied from social media and sound like the person is speaking?
Yes, today it is. We're keeping a very close eye on it. That may not be the case in the future, especially with the improvements that large, AI is having. But keep in mind too, as I said earlier, we don't have we design our security so that there's not a single point of failure. So that's one component of verification. There are other things that we do behind the scenes to identify callers when they come in. And then, of course, the agents that you speak to have processes that they follow as well, just to make sure that they're talking to who they expect to. But the short answer to your question is yes, today the Schwab voice capability is still secure.
Excellent. Two more questions for the Q&A portion, both related to email. So back to sort of what we originally started talking about.
Right.
The first one says, I sometimes receive emails from family members that indicate they are sending photos or an itinerary for me to open. I can see that it isn't their email domain, so I delete the messages. Is there a way or process I can investigate or confirm if my email has been hacked or theirs?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that you can do now, this may be challenging, but look at your sent items. Look to see what's being sent out of your email box. Now, sometimes bad actors have gotten clever enough to know that they'll send out a fraudulent email on your behalf, and then they'll delete it from your sent items. So if you have any suspicion that your account has been compromised, reset your password. That should lock the bad actor out. Again, depending on the provider, when you go into the settings, some providers will show you what sessions or what machines you've logged in from, what other sessions are active, and you can stop or delete those sessions. That may kick out a bad actor if they've gotten access to your email. But if you've set up multi-factor authentication and it's available, that should help prevent that from happening in the first place. The other thing that comes to mind in that example from the question is just to pick up the phone and call or send a text. Hey, did you send me some pictures over email about the vacation? And go to the source directly through a different channel, right? Not emailing them back, but send them a text message and verify if it was legitimate or not.
That's great. And we had another question, which was, I never liked that Schwab puts the dollar amounts for distributions to us in the notification email. I know email is the least secure form of notification. Doesn't putting a dollar amount just attract the bad guys? And can Schwab stop putting the dollar amount in those emails?
That's a great question. This is, and this brings up one of the challenges that all of us face, and that's the balance of convenience and security. So I can imagine if we took that out of the emails, we'd have a number of folks who would say, "Why did you take that out? It's less convenient for me," right? Having those numbers in the email, is not really proprietary or sensitive information. It wouldn't allow somebody to log into the account, as an example, or gain access over the phone to your Schwab account. So that having that information in the email itself it doesn't present a security risk in itself per se. But that being said, this is an area that, this whole area of fraud and cybercrime is one that is expanding, and it may be something that we look at changing at some point in the future. We're always evaluating our security posture and ensuring that we strike the right balance between security and convenience, like I said.
Thank you for that. So I know now we have 5 minutes left. There's one topic I was hoping that we could quickly touch on, which is sort of that topic of senior investors and how they have sort of specifically been a target of fraud. And so I'm hoping you can just take a couple of minutes to explain how we can all better protect ourselves on that front, especially our senior investors.
Yeah, this is one that we all need to be vigilant around, because as we get older, unfortunately, our mental capacities for some may diminish a bit. And so the bad actors know this and they look to exploit it. Just very quickly, there's a story from a firm that we work with in California. One of their clients was an older woman, widower, very low maintenance, had low need, didn't have a lot of needs, wasn't very active in trading. She calls in and says, hey, I need $800,000 moved to an overseas account. And they asked why. And she said, I can't tell you. And they said, okay, well, let us look into it and start to get this processing. And so in that case, they had a trusted contact on file, which was this woman's son, who is not a client of the advisory firm that I'm referring to. And so they called the son and said, hey, your mom called in and we can't give you details, but something might be going on. Do you mind just checking in to make sure everything's okay? And so he did. And as it turns out, she had been convinced that her son was kidnapped, and the $800,000 was to pay the ransom to secure his freedom. Of course, that was all thwarted when the son called and wanted to find out how his mom was doing. But that shows the importance of having a trusted contact. We have those here at Schwab. I know Aspen has them as well. But having that trusted contact can be really critical in situations where somebody's capacity is diminished over time. Be on the lookout for loved ones as well too. With my dad who's getting older, he loves to get those scam calls, and he'll say things like, okay, do you take a check or money order or credit card? And I keep telling him, Dad, this is their job. They're going to get you at some point. Just disengage. But to the older investors, one of the other areas that is something to be aware of and cause for concern is the use of AI by bad actors. So they'll do things like use AI to help identify folks that have experienced the loss of a loved one, knowing that those folks might be lonely. And so they'll target those people, a few months after the loved one has passed for a romance scam. The critical and vulnerable investors category is unfortunately the area that we're seeing the senior and vulnerable investor category is one that we're seeing the largest uptick in crime. And so the first step is to be aware that if you're in that category, you're likely at a higher risk than others because of the age that you have, and you need to be extra vigilant out there.
Thank you for that. That is a super important topic for us as well. So I'm glad we were able to cover it at least a little bit. Just to wrap us up, I wanted to thank everybody for submitting the questions that you did, both in advance of this discussion and also during. It's great to hear what you're actually wondering about and care about, and give us the opportunity to address those. And to emphasize a couple of things that we covered that we think are just incredibly important. Some things that Nick had covered. One is those strong, unique passwords and having them be long. Two, setting up multi-factor authentication on every platform that you can, especially those that involve sensitive data. And then three, keeping your software up to date and always installing those security patches as soon as they become available. So those are just a couple of takeaways for you. If you have any other questions, of course, feel free to reach out to us at any time. We are here to be a resource for you, and we work with really great partners like Nick. So thank you all again for taking the time to join us today. We will be creating a recording of this webinar and sending that out to everyone who registered, as well as posting it on our website. So thank you again, and we will get you out of here on time.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Nick.